All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo conflict. I'm Anna.
I'm Taksha. I'm Shreya.
All right, let's start with a brief overview. So, I already said the name of the conflict. Countries involved include the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, North Kivu, South Kivu, Ituri, neighboring countries, um, and then major groups and leaders involve the government, such as the armed forces of the DRC, Felix, Toshideki, rebel and armed groups like the M23, Allied Democratic Forces, and Mai groups, and also regional leaders as well. The conflict is still ongoing, fighting in the eastern DRC. M23 is still active in key areas, controlling or contesting land, and there have been efforts for ceasefire, but conflict remains. The DRC and Rwanda have high tensions due to the DRC accusing Rwanda of supporting M23, though they denied that. And the humanitarian crisis is getting worse and worse with the struggle to give aid because of the constant ongoing violence. Um, this conflict matters globally because it is a humanitarian emergency, and the mineral reserves in the eastern DRC are needed for phones, electric vehicle batteries, and renewable energy, such as cobalt, coltan, copper, tin, and gold. And neighboring states face instability because of strained relations, as well as a struggle within global supply chains. And as you can see here, this kind of shows the widespread food shortage and the struggle going on. 112 million people struggling, and then that kind of shows the conditions. And here is a map showing where the DRC is in Africa. So, the historical background, the conditions that have led to this conflict include colonial legacy, with the colonial rule from Belgium's control that led to weak political institutions, economic inequality, and ethnic divisions. Political instability, even after independence was granted, there were still coups, civil wars, and authoritarian rule. The Rwandan genocide. After the genocide, there were hundreds of thousands of refugees that entered the eastern DRC, and bases were established in the region by armed groups that were responsible for the genocide, and Rwanda became intervened. The first Congo War involved the authoritarian rule being overthrown and Laurent Desire Kabila coming to power. The Second Congo War involved multiple African countries, and there were millions of deaths because of violence, disease, and starvation. And when that war ended, many armed groups remained active in the eastern DRC.
So the timeline of the DRC conflict is here, and since Anna already touched upon this, we'll start after that. So basically, a peace agreement was signed, which created a transitional government, and the M23 rebel groups formed and captured the city of Goma, and then in 2013, M23 was defeated and temporarily disappeared. And after that, an Ebola outbreak worsened the humanitarian crisis. In 2021, M23 began reorganizing and later launched a new offensive. By 2025, M23 captured major areas including Goma and Bakuba, which escalated the crisis dramatically. Today, fighting still continues into 2027. And the next segment is here's some of the images. And this is a map. Um, the stakeholders and the perspectives. The Congolese government wants to reassert control over eastern regions and protect its sovereignty. M23 claims it is defending Congolese Tutsi populations and responding to broken peace agreements. Rwanda believed it was protecting itself from Hutu militias like the FDLR. Uganda, Uganda's involvement as counterterrorism and economic security. Local militias like Mai groups see themselves as defenders of their communities, and the United Nations aim to stabilize the region and protect civilians through its peacekeeping missions, MONUSCO. Meanwhile, the global corporations benefit indirectly from access to valuable minerals. The main cause of this conflict, what we believed was going to be the foreign interferences, although there's many other causes like the ethnic tensions, valuable minerals, weak government control, and the effects of the Rwandan genocide, we thought foreign interference was the best from the countries like Rwanda and Uganda, and these countries had supported armed groups in eastern Congo. For example, Rwanda has been accused of backing the M23 rebel group, which had helped to capture major cities like Goma and became much stronger than other militias. Rwanda says it was just protecting itself from Hutu militias, which was linked to the genocide. And then the foreign interference also played a major role in the Second Congo War, when multiple countries got involved and turned into a conflict into a regional war. And outside support gives rebel groups weapons, training, and money, making them harder to defeat. And this matters most because it turns a local conflict into a bigger regional struggle, which keeps the fighting going longer and weakens the DRC's control over its own country. Even though the other factors matter, foreign interference is the biggest cause because it keeps the conflict active and more intense.
So, along with this, there's a huge impact on civilians because the human cost involves millions of deaths from disease, malnutrition, lack of health care, and along with that major displacement, millions of civilians have been forced from their homes, and refugee populations have increased a lot in neighboring countries. Um, Along with that, there's immense sexual violence. Women and girls have been affected the most, though men and boys have been victims as well. Children have been recruited to be fighters, porters, messengers, and other modes of support people. There's also been severe economic hardship with food insecurity, livelihood being completely lost, limited access to education, and poor access to healthcare, and psychological impact from the constant violence and assault, mental challenges, or widespread trauma and anxiety have become severe. Two specific cases include malaria and displacement camps, where mosquitoes have ideal breeding conditions because of the overcrowding and poor sanitation. And nearly 70% of malaria-related deaths have been for children under the age of 5. The second case involves the Goma and Eastern DRC displacement catastrophe, where an escalation around Goma displaced over 700,000 people, and roughly 7.3 million individuals remain internally displaced, and dozens of displacement camps were destroyed. You can see here, when I share my screen, the human impact with the disaster in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You can see the M23 involved fatalities have a huge jump in 2025. And along with that, the lighter blue shows the other fatalities related to the conflict. So it's just so many deaths overall. The next thing is going to be about international involvement. So analyzing the role of different organizations such as the United Nations, which has one of its largest peacekeeping missions, protecting civilians, monitoring ceasefires, supporting humanitarian operations, and assisting state institutions. Neighboring countries such as Rwanda focus on security threats near its border. Uganda has economic and security interests in the eastern DRC. Burundi has deployed forces against rebel groups near its border. Angola is often a mediator in peace negotiations. The U.S. Involves humanitarian assistance and they promote mineral supply chains responsibly. Russia has interest in the economy and mining, as well as China, who controls a lot of the DRC's cobalt and copper mines foreign. Um, and their mining interests kind of fuel the illicit economy. Um, NGOs and humanitarian organizations include Doctors Without Borders, who help control disease outbreaks and provide emergency medical care. The Danish Refugee Council, which provides shelter, protection, and economic recovery services. The Pansy Foundation, which is support for sexual violence survivors, medical, psychological, legal support, anything like that. And then CARE has a focus on women and just their economic empowerment and food and nutrition security.
Thank you for that, Anna and Shreya. Now let's move on to media and bias analysis. It's important to note that media and bias changes based on what the source is. So we'll analyze Western media, international media, as well as regional media. To begin with Western media, let's begin with the BBC. The BBC is a popular Western media news outlet. Here, the source explains what the humanitarian crisis in the DRC is. It recounts statistics as well as cases of sexual violence against children. Violence survivors shortly state what happened to them in this article. The BBC also focuses on broader issues by accusing Rwanda of supporting M23 and addressing diplomatic responses. Um, Now let's move on to the East African, which is a regional source. More than any other source, the East African emphasizes the role the U.S. has played in the conflict. The source explains how the conflict affects neighboring East African countries and regional security, as well as political tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. More details about the recent situation are explained in the peace treaty between DRC and Rwanda. Now moving on to a international source. This is the UN Refugee Agency. It highlights the civilian suffering, displacement, and need for humanitarian aid. Other than explaining the disparity of the situation, this source also makes a point to explain its own role in the crisis and directly states the UNHCR's 2026 strategy to help the DRC. This conflict is differently framed based on who it is stating what is happening. The DRC conflict, based on Western media, is framed as a humanitarian crisis, and the focus is not really on the historical context, rather it is the civilian suffering. Regional sources explain how the conflict affects much of East Africa rather than just the DRC. It explains the role of the US, which is not explained much in other articles. The international organizations frame the situation as a human rights crisis and shows the need of aid. The main perspective that are emphasized in each source is the civilians, because much of the Western world is ignorant of civilian suffering, so it's important to highlight this. While some sources do mention the civilian experiences, they largely lack in the voice and experience of Congolese citizens, because almost 28 million people are affected in Congo, and the limited articles available do not capture everything the civilians face. Because of this lack of coverage, many uh, people are ignorant of this crisis. This is because the media is influenced by what the public picks and chooses to care about and what they choose to ignore. Much of the Western media undercovers this crisis in the DRC due to lack of public interest in political relations. About 1.5 articles per day are released on the Congo crisis, which affects so many people, while other more popular conflicts that affect less people average about 60 articles per day. The media also influences who people sympathize with, as well as what places receive humanitarian aid and diplomatic intervention. Now let's move on to historical comparisons. This conflict can be compared to the scramble for Africa. The scramble for Africa was a rapid invasion, division, and colonization of the African continent by European powers between 1881 and 1914. It was driven by the desire for valuable natural resources, new markets, and national prestige. Belgium was involved, and King Leopold II, the Belgian emperor, claimed the massive resource-rich territory of the Congo, which is now the DRC, for his own personal fortune. These conflicts are very similar because they both involve competition over Africa's valuable natural resources. Both European powers saw resources and economic gain during the scramble for Africa, and today armed groups fight over minerals like cobalt, coltan, and gold in the eastern Congo. Foreign European nations competed for control of African territories, while neighboring countries influenced the DRC conflict. People living within the region suffer the consequences of greed for wealth and influence. While these two conflicts are very similar, they do have some differences. The scramble for Africa was a period of colonization by European empires, but while the conflict in the DRC was initiated by rebel and armed groups like the M23, as well as neighboring states rather than colonial governments. During the scramble for Africa, European nations targeted all of Africa. Meanwhile, this modern conflict is a target for natural resources in the DRC. The DRC is not an independent country, whereas during the scramble for the DRC is an independent country, whereas the scramble for Africa, most African societies had little political power against the European imperialism, and very little aid was provided. Both these conflicts show a recurring historical pattern, such as the competition for resources, which leads to exploitation and violence, and long-term instability as a result of local communities not having a say in borders or politics. It's important to learn the lesson that is shown by both these conflicts, such as economic interests should not take priority over human rights and the well-being of local populations, and that African nations and regional organizations should work together to find a solution to help the local populations that are being exploited. As a proposed response or solution, it is important to strengthen regional peace negotiations between the DRC, Rwanda, Uganda, and the US, and other neighboring countries. It is important to increase the humanitarian aid for the displaced citizens and victims in this conflict. There should be strict monitoring of the trade of conflict minerals used by the armed groups to fund their violence. This will be difficult because the M23 and other rebel groups identify themselves with certain countries, but the countries do not are not willing to help the DRC as much. It is important to promote support services that promote reconciliation, economic development, and stronger government in the DRC. There should be increased media coverage to spread awareness of the situation in the DRC so more people are willing to help the civilians. This approach will assure the immediate humanitarian crisis in the DRC is helped while also addressing the long-term issue of the conflict. Well, this is most ideal. It is important to note that the DRC's wealth and natural resources make it difficult to propose a solution because human greed is inevitable. To note, the DRC is known as the rich land with poor people because it possesses an estimated 24 trillion in untapped raw materials. World powers and rebel groups will stop at nothing to possess this wealth. So while solution is what a solution is important, it is often difficult in these type of situations.
Yes. Thank you for that. Well, we hope you enjoyed our podcast, describing the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo that has been going on and is still going on. And we just hope you learned from an unbiased point of view more about it.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks.